All right, today we're jumping into one of history's most fascinating and honestly dramatic power shifts. We're talking about a time when a colossal empire just fractures. And what comes next? Well, it's an era of wild ambition, of conflict, and of creation that completely remakes the map of 18th century India.
I mean, it's a question you could ask about any time in history, right? What actually happens when a superpower falls apart? Is it just chaos and anarchy? Or does it create this vacuum that's filled with ambition and, for some, a huge opportunity?
So let's set the scene. For about 200 years, the Mughals were the power on the Indian subcontinent. I mean, their wealth was the stuff of legend. Their power felt totally absolute. But then, as we get into the early 1700s, the foundations of what seemed like an unshakable empire, well, they start to show some serious cracks.
And that's the thing. This isn't just a story about an empire falling. It's really a story about what and who rose up to take its place. We're talking about provincial governors, rebel warriors, local chieftains, all these people who looked at the collapse not as an ending, but as the beginning of something totally new.
So the big question is, how does an empire that powerful just lose its grip? Well, it wasn't one single event. It was more like a perfect storm of problems, financial, military, and political, all hitting at the exact same time.
And these things created this vicious cycle. You had Emperor Aurangzeb's long, really expensive wars draining the treasury dry. So what do? You raise taxes. But that puts incredible pressure on the peasants and the local leaders, and all the while, hundreds of miles away from the capital, these powerful governors are starting to think, wait a minute, why am I running this whole province for the emperor when I could just run it for myself? It's a dangerous thought.
Okay, so as the emperor's authority starts to fade, these ambitious leaders see their chance, and they grab it. But here's what's interesting. They don't all use the same playbook. In fact, we can break it down into three really distinct paths that people took to carve out their own kingdoms from the wreckage of the old empire. And this framework is really key to understanding the whole century. First up, you had the old guard. These were the insiders, right? The Mughal governors who basically decided to go into business for themselves. Then, you've got the independents. Think of powerful kingdoms like the Rajputs. They were already pretty autonomous, and they just skillfully navigated the chaos to become fully independent. And finally, you had the rebels. These are the groups who built their power from the ground up by fighting the empire head-on. All right, let's dive into that first group, the insiders. Now, these guys were the governors of the empire's richest provinces. We're talking about places like Awadh, Bengal, and Hyderabad. And the thing is, they didn't even need to declare war. They just sort of stopped taking orders from Delhi.
Now, to really get their strategy, you have to understand this one key term, Jagirdar. So think of it like this. These were imperial officials, but instead of getting a salary, they were given the right to collect all the taxes from a specific piece of land, called a jagir. This system was genius, because it made sure their loyalty was always to the emperor, the guy who gave them the jagir. So you can see, if you're a governor trying to break away, these jagirdars are your number one obstacle.
And check this out. We see two super clever but totally different ways they dealt with this problem. Over in Awadh, the governor, Sadad Khan, he goes for a direct approach. He just shrinks the number of imperial jagirdars and puts his own loyal guys in their place. But in Bengal, what Murshid Quli Khan does is frankly even more cunning. He doesn't fire them, oh no, he just transfers all of them to the neighboring province of Orissa, which was much poorer. Genius, right? Out of sight, out of power. Both moves did the same thing. They gave the governors total control over the money and the military in their province.
This led to a completely new way of doing business. To make sure they had cash flowing in, these new rulers started auctioning off the right to collect taxes. To the highest bidder. And this created a whole new powerful class of people called revenue farmers, or ijardars. And this was a huge deal. It was a massive power shift away from the old landowning nobility and straight into the hands of a new group of moneymen and financiers.
And this gets us to the really crucial takeaway for this first group. For these new rulers, independence wasn't just one with swords and soldiers, it was one in the accounting books. They built these powerful new alliances with local bankers and merchants, the people who could actually front them the cash and credit to run a state, and that meant, for the very first time, this new financial elite had a real, vested interest in making sure these new regional kingdoms succeeded.
But, okay, not everyone was playing this subtle insider's game. For a lot of other groups, the path to power wasn't about clever accounting and moving people to other provinces. No, their path was paved with open rebellion. It was forged in the fire of direct conflict with the Mughal Empire itself.
And two groups in particular really stand out here. You've got the Marathas, down in the Deccan Plateau, and the Sikhs up in the Punjab. The Marathas, led by the legendary Shivaji, built this incredible, highly mobile army of peasant warriors. Meanwhile, up north, the Sikhs were being forged into this powerful warrior brotherhood called the Khalsa, and their goal was clear: to create their own sovereign state.
So how did the Marathas pay for this incredible expansion? With a tax called chauth, which literally means 1/4. Their strategy was brutally simple. They'd ride into a territory and demand 25% of all the land revenue. If you paid up, great, they'd leave you alone. But if you refused, well, then you'd have to deal with their army. It was, you have to admit, a brutally effective way to fund a state on the rise.
And get this, chauth was just part of it. They also collected another tax of 10% called sardeshmukhi. So you add that up, 25 plus 10, the Marathas are claiming over a third of the entire region's income. This wasn't just random raiding anymore. This was a highly sophisticated system designed to finance a huge modern war machine.
The Sikhs, on the other hand, they developed their own really innovative system. It was called rakhi, and it was basically a deal they offered to farmers. It was simple. Give us 20% of your harvest, and in return, the Khalsa will protect you. And not just from the Mughals, but from anyone. Afghan invaders, other warlords, you name it. It was essentially a protection pact. They were building a state from the grassroots up by giving people the one thing the empire couldn't anymore: real security.
So you can see the two different approaches right here. The Maratha chauth was a tax on the entire region's administration. The Sikh rakhi was a direct deal with the farmers on the ground. But even though the methods were different, both systems achieved the exact same revolutionary thing. They cut the economic pipeline that used to flow to the Mughal emperor, and they redirected that whole river of wealth to build their own powerful new states.
So what's the end result of all this ambition, all this conflict? Well, by the middle of the 1700s, the political map of India it's just unrecognizable. That single, huge, centralized empire had completely shattered. And in its place was this dynamic and, pretty dangerous mosaic of competing kingdoms.
So let's just recap. The old reality? Gone. Instead of one empire, you now have all these competing powers, and each one is funded by its own new, super efficient tax system. You've got the breakaway provinces, the rebel states, and other groups like the newly empowered Rajputs. Everybody is carving out their piece of the pie. And, towering over most of them, you have the Marathas, who had built this powerful confederacy of families, the Scindias, the Gaikwads, the Holkars, who looked ready to dominate the whole subcontinent. But here's the final thought. This new world, this patchwork of competing states, it was vibrant for sure, but it was also incredibly unstable. And that really set the stage for the next massive question of the 18th century. Which one of these new Indian powers was going to be the one to finally unite the subcontinent? Or was it going to be an entirely new player, one that